Certainly welcome back to our State of Diversity. As many of you are entering this session 2 of our 2-part State of Diversity, we ask you to adhere to our Zoom etiquette. And so this is a panel format for this afternoon's session. And so we have muted participants. However, you are able to use the Q&A function of this particular chat room that would allow you to, one, if there are issues that you're experiencing in terms of technical difficulties, you can communicate that to us using the Q&A feature. And then also, as we move on through the panel, if you do have questions for our panelists, you can certainly submit those to the question and answer feature as well. Please note that once your question is getting addressed, it may disappear from the function. And so don't worry, we've not deleted your question, that we have put it in the queue in terms of being asked. There may be other questions that you ask that are better suited for a follow-up via email or a conversation with someone on our team, and we will certainly make sure that we are able to accommodate that. Lastly, and most importantly, in terms of access, we have provided closed captions as an option. And so you can find that button at the bottom lower right-hand corner of the Zoom window to ensure that for those who may be hard of hearing, and it could be extremely important to have those closed captioning. With that said, we will move into this afternoon session, and to start with introductions, we have Dr. Nkenji Friday, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives. Dr. Friday.
Good morning again, everyone, and welcome to session number 2. I'm going to start with our panelists in alphabetical order. And just as a reminder, in the chat feature, you'll see there is a link to access the panelists' full bios on our website. So I'm going to start with Dr. Catrice Albert. She's EVP, Culture, Innovation, and Inclusion, S2A Solutions, founder and managing director of the Third Eye Consulting, and she's a passionate national thought leader who has masterfully interwoven the areas of inclusive excellence, higher education, intercollegiate athletics, culture, and engagement with a penchant for people-centered talent management and mission-driven visionary leadership. Dr. Albert has a distinguished career in higher education and intercollegiate athletics. Most recently, she served as the Executive Vice President of Inclusion and Human Resources at the NCAA. Previously, she served as Vice President for Equity and Diversity of the University of Minnesota System, and before that as Vice Provost for Equity, Diversity, and Community Outreach at Louisiana State University. Dr. Albert. We also have alongside us Dr. Rona Tamiko Halulani. I think many of us are probably familiar with Dr. Halulani, as our experience at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln has shown us. She's one of the founders of Halulani and Associates, and is a leading presenter and author in the field of intercultural communication and diversity analytics. She and her brother created Halulani and Associates in 2008 and has served many higher education and private industry clients since then. She's a published intercultural communication scholar with 2 published books and over 30 academic journal articles and chapters in prestigious scholarly outlets. She currently consults for other higher education institutions, two-year colleges, 4-year public and private universities, faith-based colleges and universities on diversity strategy, diversity mapping, planning, and evaluation. To date, under her leadership, Halulani and Associates has worked with 50 higher education institutions, including Indiana University's 7 campuses, and of course, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And finally, we have Dr. Daryl G. Smith, a senior research fellow and professor emerita of education and psychology at the Claremont Graduate University. Prior to assuming her current faculty position, she served as a college administrator in planning, institutional research, and student affairs. Her research has been in the areas of organizational implications of diversity, assessment and evaluation, leadership, governance, and faculty diversity. Among other published work, she's the author or co-author of Diversity's Promise for Higher Education, Making It Work. And I just have to do this plug right here because I think many of our members of some of our working groups are very familiar with this book. She's also the author of Building Institutional Capacity for Diversity and Inclusion in Medical Education, The Challenge of Diversity, Alienation, or Involvement in the Academy, Achieving Faculty Diversity, Debunking the Myths, Interrupting the Usual Successful Strategies for Hiring Diverse Faculty, and Organizational Learning as a Tool for Diversity and Institutional Effectiveness. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists.
Thank you so much, Dr. Friday. So I have to say that I am just head over heels excited. It's a bit raining in Lincoln to our panelists. And so, but there's a ray of sunshine, I tell you, on this screen and just beaming from me because I cannot be more overjoyed to have our panel. Distinguished scholars, practitioners, and just amazing women leaders in higher education being a part of this panel, but also a part of my life, right? So I shared with them, we had a pre-call, and I shared with each of them have really been critical to me being in this role today and being in this particular position with Dr. Albert, who has been a long time advisor, consultant, therapist, because she's a trained counseling psychologist, but just has been a number of roles in my life and was the person who gave me my very first diversity role. And so if anyone takes issue with how I do diversity, you can see Dr. Albert after today's panel. The second person, oh my goodness, Rona has been so instrumental in terms of helping to shape a lot of the beginning work of this office and providing some very first beginnings of what this work could look like with her work. She probably even knows UNL better than I do, just in terms of the level of care and attention that she gives her mapping exercises and her assessment and being able to do this work. I actually had a chance to engage Rona prior to this role at another institution. And so I am just really thrilled that part of her work led to the structure of this office. And so I'm so thrilled to have Rona joining us today. Oh, and oh my goodness, Daryl has been so key. I met Daryl in a prior role prior to starting at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I had a chance, a previous supervisor who said, one of the first books you have to read is this one. And it was Daryl Smith's book. And Daryl has helped me tremendously think about how I organize and frame diversity work for others so that they have capacity to be able to do this work as well. And so thank you, Daryl, for just always being thoughtful in the way that you approach these particular issues has certainly added to my ability to be able to help institutions. And so we have a phenomenal session planned for everyone today. Again, we hope that you do utilize the Q&A, and please do ask us questions. We have a set of questions that I want to be able to ask our panel. And so we will absolutely dive right in. I see that Rona's already getting a few shout outs early on. And so I think again, it speaks to just the way that she forms relationships when she's doing this work. So we're in really difficult times, panel, and I think we know this, and often these times have been described at sort of this crossroads of a number of crises, right? I mean, we certainly can see opportunities, but we can't, I think, ignore that we have a number of crises happening right now, whether it's the health crises in terms of the pandemic and the way that it is impacting communities, and in many cases, minoritized and marginalized communities. I think that has certainly had an impact on our financial crises, right? So we know that there are businesses, small businesses in particular, that are hit hard by what is happening with the pandemic. Our institutions have been hit hard of what's happening with the pandemic. And then we also realize that this sort of racial crisis around racial justice and equity, which is not new to our country, but something that sort of resurfaced in a very loud way this summer, another crisis that we find ourselves. And so when we start thinking about that, all of these crises can certainly intersect, right, at identities, and especially for Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Indigenous people, other people of color, other marginalized, oppressed communities, that we know that how do we begin to, I guess, start thinking about, so how do we situate inclusive excellence, right? Like all these competing priorities, all these crises that are happening, where do we either situate or rank inclusive excellence as we're trying to really consider all of this and doing DEI work in the midst of all of these challenges, right? Like we're in a pandemic, we're having all these crises. Where does diversity and inclusion work fit in? Like what's the greater priority? And so I may want to throw this to Dr. Smith or Dr. Albert. One of you want to start Okay, I think Daryl has passed the baton to you, Catrice.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Marco. Thank you so much, Dr. Barker, for having us. And I'm so delighted to be on this panel with Dr. Smith and Dr. Hulualani. I mean, you've situated a dream team. So I'm just thrilled to be a part of it. And you're absolutely right. We're at the apex of a crisis, right? It's this past due reckoning around race and racism and anti-Black hatred, situated in this pandemic, a global pandemic impacting our minoritized communities and really impacting the finances of small businesses, often women-owned, targeted, minority-owned businesses. And DE&I work, belonging work, I think, no doubt should be situated at the very core of our university structure. If we're to be creative and innovative in a crisis, right? Take this as an opportunity. It should be woven at the very core. Foundations and corporate donors are putting a lot of resources into us doing the smart thing, right? So we need to be thoughtful about how we not only support the people, propelling people on our university campuses, but how do we hire for diverse top talent? How are we situating our DE&I work related to climate and culture now that we're distanced, right? DE&I work is relational, but we're now having to be, socially distanced and distanced in ways where we're having to do things by Zoom and Microsoft Teams. It is a health crisis, but how do we focus in on health and wellness, especially mental health and emotional health and wellness during this, really challenging time for our minoritized communities? I think the value of weaving DE&I right at the center and right at the core suggests to us who we want to be, right? That's going to be the answer to the question, who we want to be. And the value system, the value proposition for Nebraska is that you're situated at the table where decisions are being made for the very first time, right? The inaugural Chief Diversity Officer, Vice President for Inclusion and Inclusive Excellence is situated at a table where all of these decisions are being made. So I cannot implore universities more right now than to have this critical work around inclusive excellence be at the table where all decisions are being made.
Absolutely. Daryl.
Yes, and I'm going to play a role of being a challenger, if I might, as we go forward, because I do think this is a challenging moment and an opportunity moment. So LeBron James was asked what he felt about this moment with the racial injustice that was now becoming much more owned by more people. He said he was caught between hope and history. So I'm caught between hope and history on this. Over the last decades on these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've had crises, we have response, and then we move on. And in the face of all of these crises, it's very easy to think, well, where is this ranked? And what I would say to you is that if our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are laundry lists of programs and efforts on the backs of the same few people who've been doing this, some of them for decades, we don't have much hope. So the framing for me is the issue, and I want to keep pushing on that in our panel today. For me, the crises have just exploded all the deep structural inequities that have long existed in our society, in the justice system, economic inequities, well-being, and in education. And, as we're relying on Zoom, I looked on the census and about 20% of the people in Nebraska don't have internet access. Well, look at the inequities that exist in our systems that we can't assume are there for everybody. So the reality, I think, is building DEI work has to be framed as building capacity as an imperative for excellence, not just as an imperative for interpersonal stuff, but as an imperative for excellence for everyone, for a pluralistic society that works. There are not many examples of pluralistic societies that work around the world. I think we want to be one of them. And this means embedding this work. If this work is add-on work on the backs of the few, and believe me, in Nebraska, it's the few, it will not be the kind of systemic change that are being demanded now. And I just want to use a quick parallel to technology. When we understood decades ago that technology was an imperative in a changing society, we didn't wait till everybody loved it. We didn't wait till everybody was happy to see their latest upgrade in their system. It was not optional. And we set about the question of how do we build capacity? And senior information officers' roles were created, not to do all things technology, but to help capacity, to help embed this in teaching and learning, in research, in the content of the curriculum. Technology has transformed virtually every core effort we do. And if it were not for that decades of work, just as for the decades of ethnic studies, for example, and gender studies and all the work that's been done, we wouldn't be where we are today. We wouldn't have Zoom. I can't even imagine living through this pandemic without Zoom. So the key there was technology was not optional, but we went about helping people learn. And the senior information officers were there to help people learn things that they didn't have knowledge of. And this has continued for decades. We built capacity in our systems, our policies, but also in our curriculum and in our people. So I just want to say that if we can do that, if we understand this as an imperative for excellence, just as we now understand that technology is an imperative for surviving this pandemic, it will not be optional and won't fall to the bottom of some list.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful. And as I think about, the sort of two keywords that you address, Daryl, around being an imperative, being embedded in a way. And so speaking of being embedded, so Rona, you were here a few years ago to help us think about how diversity and inclusion is embedded or not into the institution and looking at all different facets of the institution. And so I suspect that I, and along with many members of our community, are very curious on what progress would look like, right? So if we were really being thoughtful and intentional about what you found, because again, you learned a lot about us during that time, what progress would look like, maybe a sneak peek of where you have observed progress for our university, or where we may still be lagging behind. And so inquiring minds wants to know how we're doing, and just a bit more about the mapping.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Well, Dr. Barker and Dr. Albert and Dr. Smith and your entire team, I'm just thrilled to be here. I want to touch on Daryl's comments a little bit later in this, but the mere fact that you are here, Dr. Barker and your team, what I refer to as a diversity infrastructure, which I think also needs to be built out even more to do the work that it takes. I'll get to that later. I was last at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Shout out to Lance Perez, Bill Nunez, and Crystal, who were my liaisons. To the UNL community, it's great to be back. 2017, I believe I mapped your diversity efforts and curricula from 2011 through 2016, so about a 5-year retrospective. And I went back and looked at kind of what I have this massive spreadsheet, and I have all of my notions, and I looked back at where you all were. And my sense back then was you were a campus that was definitely trying to figure out where you were. I think in many ways you knew, right? You did not have a diversity leader at the helm at that time, which I was pushing on. And I'm not even sure if you knew exactly where you all were with regard to diversity strategy in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You did have a lot of efforts, a lot of energy, a lot of activities, and you have those people that I refer to as the superheroes, whether it was in Oasis, whether it was in all of the different colleges, there are the superheroes. And so as I listened to this morning, and thank you, just the slides, the videos, all of the participation that took, I was blown away by several things. I was blown away by the fact that there is a diversity infrastructure. There appears to be the beginning stages of alignment. And what I mean by alignment is that you all are pointing your sails in the same direction to some extent. There's capacity, but there's also alignment, and those two really are important together. I love the fact that the data, I mean, Daryl and Dr. Albert, you also talk about data and how important that is. And so that for me, and not being afraid to engage the data. And when I was there in 2017, you weren't afraid back then. You actually said, we want to look at ourselves amid the peers. We want to see where we are, Rona, because we know we could be a lot better. So I think I was struck by all of those different notions. And N25, your strategic plan, 2025, UNL 2025, I think is really important. I know that you have a key goal related to DEI, and it's a strategic framework type of goal that allows you to let divisions and programs inhabit that in the way that they do, which I love, but also being able to steer in the same direction. So I want to affirm you, and I want to affirm that. And then I want to say next, you're going to be like, there's Rona again. I want you to think of the long game. Okay. And the long game for me is you can't stop now. And I'm amazed that Dr. Barker and his team, I'm amazed you're able to do all of the relational work and everything that you do with where you are. And so that diversity infrastructure and that relational work that takes place, it takes time, it takes people. Remember, chief diversity officers and diversity leaders have a very high burnout rate. And so for me, I want to make sure that Dr. Barker and his entire team has the infrastructure, has that capacity with regard to that. And I would also say this, keeping the eye on alignment, keeping the eye on impact. And some people are like, what do you mean by impact? Is it just the numbers and the assessment outcomes? Yes, but you can also have process-based outcomes. You can also have, are the conversations on your campus changing around race, around non-binary identities? I mean, even something like that is thinking about impact. And in your own office, you're looking at impact as well, Dr. Barker, and as well as other entities at your unit, but actually having diversity impact professionals, having a collaborative that looks at that. Penn State University has a large diversity impact team, and they're all connected to different colleges and different outfits, different fiscal units and everything, and it's powerful. So your own unique culture. And then I guess the last thing I would say, so I don't take up much time, is I really want to emphasize the curriculum. I'm sorry, I have to go there. And I refer to that as the diversity learning architecture of your institution. And what I mean by that is, you'll see if you ever go back and and want to have some light reading on the diversity mapping report, the last half of it was a really deep dive on your curricula. Some wonderful, wonderful undergraduate, graduate, and professional courses. I mean, your faculty and departments just have fascinating courses and curricular designs. And my question back to UNL is, even without that information, what is it that you want students to know as they enter UNL? And how do you want to life stage that process of engagement around knowledge of diversity, equity, inclusion? We often think DEI is a demographic. It's the hiring rates. For me, it's a knowledge domain. And it's a special knowledge domain because these may be not the last moments, but some of the most opportune moments for us in higher ed to have these conversations. And then the last thing for me is, I understand that we live in a world where we want to see peers, and that's very important in competition. But I also think, I would never, if I'm thinking of peers based on cooking, they would never have me in the mix as some kind of standard of excellence to go from, right? But they'd have my mother and they'd have my father and whatnot. So I also think that UNL, it's important to do peer competition, but I also think it's important for you to create goals of excellence for yourself. What does that mean for you? And we are in line with Indiana, we're in line with Iowa, but UNL, you have a unique configuration, especially with regard to First Peoples, especially where you are in the nation. And so I want you to think about that for the long game. So I'll leave it there, Dr. Barker, so I can
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, Rona. So first, I do want to do a shout out to, yes, my amazing leadership team of Jerry, Dr. Nkenchi Friday, Dr. Gwen Combs, who's doing our faculty diversity work, Charlie Foster with OASIS doing inclusive and excellence, Dr. Karen Castlebaum, who I referenced in our earlier session, that being able to have the right infrastructure has made a difference. We're certainly on our way, right? I think we still have some work to do in terms of having the capacity to be able to really support our campus, who's been very excited behind this work. And there's so many people trying to do work. I guess there are so many things happening that we're just trying to keep up and be as supportive as possible. So I appreciate that. You mentioned something, so I want to maybe ask Daryl a follow-up question, right? So you mentioned, Rona, about our End 2025, this notion about setting goals of excellence and what that looks like for us. And so we have started to do that with our End 2025. We've couched all of our goals around this ideal about every interaction, every person, every interaction. It matters to Nebraskans. It's really core to who we are. Our people are really core to who we are. And so, Daryl, in your book, you talk a lot about this ideal about really, again, embedding inclusive excellence, making sure that it is woven throughout every single thing that you do. So as we are on our quest to ensure that every person and every interaction matters, I guess your thoughts about what that looks like. So if we are really truly living that goal, that every interaction matters, what does that look like for us?
Well, and I've thought a great deal about that, because I think at one level, I absolutely agree. And on another level, we have to be careful how we interpret it. So inclusive excellence in its tradition has not just been about interpersonal relations, but it's clear that people need to feel that they matter. And as I think about that in institutions now, and I think about it particularly in terms of retention, faculty retention, for example, which is an issue in many places, that every interaction does matter. And so one of the questions I would ask is, do faculty colleagues who bring diversity feel they matter? Do they feel their research matters? Do staff feel they matter and that their work matters? Do frontline workers, particularly in this moment in time, who often bring race, ethnic, class, gender, demographic to them, do they feel they matter? Or particularly in the case of underrepresented populations and racial minorities, particularly in a state like Nebraska, or are they there to represent, to be the token, to represent all things African-American and not what they bring through their research and their work? So I think the issue of every interaction matters is critically important. People need to feel that they belong and they matter. But there's much more to that in your strategic plan. And I want to push on that, and it aligns well with what Rona just said. You're talking about preparing leaders in research, solving complex problems, leaders in the community. So the question becomes, are you preparing everybody to understand what leadership in a pluralistic society means? Are you preparing people to understand the complexity of research? And I played with a little bit of your land grant. I think it's important here to think about the land grant mission. I'm a Cornell graduate, so I had some deep experience with that. It was new to me as a New Yorker. And there are a couple of things. One is, how did land grants happen? The Homestead Acts, whose land? All of that history is very important to acknowledge. It is also true that land grant institutions fundamentally questions measures of excellence that have been historically true in higher education. And in that regard, land grant institutions challenged the notion that application was in contradiction to scholarship. Land grant institutions focused on agriculture, applied arts, engineering, you-founded ecology. So issues of healthcare, transportation, technology, water. One of the pictures in the video showed a farm. That's what land grant institutions were about when they were founded, not in contradiction to traditional academic, but really converted the notion of what good scholarship is. That's what diversity is. And our history of assuming that diversity is in somehow contradiction to excellence. What I would say to you is that it's not just about the people, it's about the knowledge we create. And that every student, every graduate student in their curriculum, in their scholarly work, not just in the pedagogy, but in the content, what we are now agreeing to is that good science, good healthcare requires dealing with the complexity of identities and the human being. We were not doing good science when we didn't disaggregate the impact of drugs on different populations of people. Facial recognition software that was launched and didn't recognize Black faces is not good technology. I can give you all kinds of, when seatbelts were designed and they killed children and small people, not good engineering design. So what I want to say is, this is about excellence, and land-grant institutions fundamentally in the beginning challenged certain cores of that, what mattered, what knowledge mattered. So part of the issue here for me is in your strategic plan, it's, yes, the interactions matter in terms of interpersonal, but it goes deeply in terms of the assumptions about excellence, the knowledge that is taught, not only how it's taught, and also the experience of all your students in feeling comfortable engaging the complexity of identities and the embedded structural barriers that they're going to need to understand as they move into every industry. Every industry now in the face of crisis is doing the self-reflection, and people are walking around saying, I didn't know. Well, all those people were educated in our institutions. The Central Park woman who called the police on a bird watcher was significantly educated in pretty elite places and was not prepared to really think about and have knowledge about the embedded biases that exist in our society and the structural inequities, and how excellence can't be done in any of these industries if you don't think about diversity. And finally, that you need diversity around your table, and you need people who are a trusted environment is created so people can speak. In every institution I've been at, people may be seeing things. The question is, are they empowered to speak? And I was pleased by your chancellor's opening remarks, because I think he set a stage very much in terms of the anti-racism work that's very important. But we should not in 2020 be walking around going, I didn't know. I never learned about the Tulsa massacres. Why are we just learning about that now? So that's my challenge. Keep moving.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Albert.
Dr. Barker, I think Dr. Smith is just so elegant and on point with the notion that land grants, the notion of a land grant where academics is not in contradiction of practice. And Dr. Barker and I both were at LSU, and the only city where there's a predominantly white institution and a historically Black institution with a land grant at LSU and Southern University. So we clearly know this. And I saw in the chat, in the Q&A box, that someone says, well, we're talking so much about curriculum and academics, and we want to be able to bring in and weave in student affairs and student life. And I think Dr. Smith just mentioned it, right? We've got to be able to build global leaders, and it's woven throughout our students' entire holistic experience during their university time. And it's through the student life perspective that, you know, the woman who was significantly educated but still called the police on a Black bird watcher would have gotten that kind of experience through her student life experience, right? Because we grow global leaders in our student experiences of leadership development, when they are serving on committees, when they're being coached by advisors who will help them think through, you know, how do I really interact in a club when I'm the president, but I have a dilemma, you know, a diversity dilemma going on in my club. So I think, you know, Dr. Smith, you're spot on that it's the infrastructure, but it's woven throughout the students' entire holistic experience, not just in the classroom, but in their student affairs experience as well.
Well, and the research on student success, and you pointed out you've got some work to do. The old research, and this is what bad research was, we've used background characteristics to predict success, and then we said zip code predicts success. Well, what we know is the experience in college facilitates success and interrupts. And a culture of success, which has been the phrase used for student success and student affairs, is a culture that keeps an eye out. And so it's not just the classroom, it's the dining hall worker who notices that the student isn't eating. It's the grounds person in California. It's often a grounds person who will note that a student's in trouble. It's the financial aid person. It's the dean of students. There's a culture that says you will succeed. And what we're learning is actually we have to create that same culture of success for staff development and faculty success. So yes, it's this is a holistic way. I just want people to understand that the imperative for this also is about good knowledge.
Mhm.
And that gives us a kind of scholarly, we are universities. And part of that is the knowledge, and why we know that faculty diversity is important is just not so people feel supported by someone who looks like them, but as actually, we've got a lot of students at the University of Nebraska who've never experienced a Black physicist
Mhm.
or a Black sociologist. But we also know that diverse faculty bring diverse questions to the research. And that's why we have research that's engaged these issues now. And it's because of ethnic studies, women's studies, LGBTQ studies. We didn't have that, we wouldn't even have the foundation for the knowledge. So yes, absolutely. I'm an old student affairs person. I was an old dean of students. So yes.
No, this is all really great. Yeah, Rona, you want to
I
add?
would add to that, when I was fortunate enough to be there in 2017 and do the mapping, and student affairs, for me, is the lifeblood of it all. And at all of the 52 campuses I go to, student affairs has a very clear understanding of what DEI means for the student. And I always refer to structures of belonging, because structures of belonging include curricula and co-curricula. I was at a predominantly white institution myself as an undergraduate student, and the student organizations, and we had like an identity space, but it wasn't formal. Those were my lifesavers. Those were my lifelines. So in the mapping, when I talk about curricula, I said there's some opportunities to connect amazing co-curricular events and programs to courses. Why are we not connecting them to shared learning outcomes and goals? Why aren't we connecting them to assignments where we can connect, look at this event you did, and look at the learning that came out of it? And so I just think that UNL has this opportunity to really, and you've got a whole bunch of that mapping work. And Marco, I can send you all of I think I looked at every course on your catalog. Amazing courses. And I can send you my thing and says, look, these are some wonderful things. So it's not just curricular, it's absolutely co-curricular as well.
Yeah, really quickly, Daryl. So I know we have some questions that people, I know we're getting warmed up. Yes, go ahead, Daryl.
Let me just say that growing up in a time where everything was optional, I've now taken a different view of everything being optional. You have wonderful lectures on your campus, speaking, coming in. And when you look at the audience, you go, it's the same people. There is an opportunity, and I've seen campuses do this, where as part of a course in sociology or history, a regular course, there is an optional list of people coming to campus and you have to go to a certain number of them, and the audience changes. And I think that's an opportunity to make use of and not just add on top of, and the same people going to the same events, number one. And the other is that we've learned a great deal from special purpose institutions, Women's College, historically Black institutions, and tribal institutions about what an environment looks like that facilitates success. And I just want to give a shout out to those kind of special purpose. I think of Xavier University in Louisiana, without whom we would not have the number of Black doctors and pharmacists we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all these comments really speak to, and it's one of the first lessons that that Dr. Albert taught me when I started working for her, was like the power of place, right? So the power of place in history and culture, and how all of that is so interwoven together in terms of thinking about how you do this work. So we want to go to several questions that we have. Jerry or Dr. Friday, we have a question from.
Yes, our first question is directed at Dr. Smith. You mentioned that there is a historical series of crises. How do we begin to break this problem?
So the question is sort of, we've been through this before, and how do we move forward? Everything I've studied now, both in terms of organizational change and looking at the conditions under which change occurs, it's when it's an imperative. And just look at technology now. This is not optional. And the way we break these crises and just this continual, and we've made progress. So it's not that no progress has been made, but it's much slower than is healthy for any healthy democracy. And for me, the issue is this framed as an imperative, not optional? Is scholarship, the NSF now requires this embedded in scholarship. The advanced grants in the NSF for a long time were facilitating the success of white women. Finally decided that maybe intersectionality was relevant and they weren't seeing women of color in science. This has to be an imperative because all of us don't add things to an already crazy list voluntarily. And so the way we break this is making sure that we understand it's not optional, and then we help people build capacity. This is about learning. This isn't about you're either good or bad. And we have to do it at every level of our institution in a context of support and learning. And one of the challenges we have now with social media, I think there's a great constraint on making mistakes. Well, healthy learning comes because you can make mistakes. So we have to figure out how to navigate that. And I think I don't know whether Nebraska is known as a culture of nice. There are states that do, but Marco, you suggested that maybe there is. In this culture of nice, what are the conditions and the ground rules we set for talking to each other, pointing out mistakes? The gender binary was something we assumed is true, and now we've had to learn, and pronouns, some people still don't understand. Are there places where people can ask what they think of as stupid questions and get answers? But it has to be an imperative. If it's optional, look, I know I should exercise more than I do. I could give you the seminar on it. And it's hard, and it can't be optional. So that to me is the fundamental core of this, and it has to be mission-centered for excellence.
Thank you. Do we have another question, Jerry?
Yes, we do have another question. This presentation has been very curriculum and academic focused. Where does the student affairs branch fit into this infrastructure?
So I think we've addressed it a little early on in terms of talking about, again, and emphasizing that there are a number of places, right? So thinking about, again, from curriculum, so the sort of the connection between curriculum and co-curricular experiences, but also thinking about overall student learning outcomes. And I would even say student, staff, and faculty outcomes, right? Many times I talk about when we're doing this work, we often only think about student outcomes and that we are here for students, but I think there's also a learning that should be happening for our faculty, that should be happening for our staff. And so there are definitely intersections. Again, I know that both Daryl and Katrisa, you sort of addressed this early on, and Rona, is there any other follow-up that you wanted to provide to this question? I think we sort of had this one answered. Do we have a next question, Jerry?
Yes. How do we square the desire to increase underrepresented populations with the assumption that everyone has a consistent high bandwidth internet connection Monday through Friday between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Central? How do we square those two desires?
So you're asking, how do we square the desire for including people recognizing the inequities in access to those things? Is that
correct? Correct.
Well, I want to just say that the current crisis, there's been a lot of language about we're all in this together, this pandemic, and we are, but we're differentially involved in this pandemic in very many ways. Small businesses, business of color, first-line workers, and the demographics of first-line workers in this country do not look like the demographics as a whole. But the internet access, that's why when I went on the census, I noted that according to the census, 20% of Nebraskans don't have a consistent internet plan. And so for me, the language of interrupting the usual. We assume and then we do, and we don't see. And that's why having diversity around your table matters, because someone says, we can't assume that, or we can't assume that everybody can work from home. What we've seen in school districts and in higher education, which were the campuses, number one, that already knew who had access to internet, and if they didn't have access to computers and internet, hotspots and computers were delivered. That is a best practice, because that immediately says to a family on one level, we get that there's differential access to things, and we, in fact, will supply that. We can interrupt the usual. It's also in terms of tutoring and support. I mean, we've got families who are now hiring tutors, and this is for young children, hiring tutors to tutor their children. Well, that's an economic gap that not everybody can do. So I think the squaring of it is to identify, first know it. And I think a lot of people didn't think about it. There are school districts in this country that are still trying to catch up and getting computers and hotspots to kids. I'm on campuses, one of the questions, and this is the student affairs role, is there a tight alignment between faculty who observe students not participating in classes and somebody calling every single student to say, what do you need? In this day and age, that's going to be required, or what we'll have is the usual. And people who either don't have access to the internet or standing outside of Starbucks with their phone and trying to write a paper. This is unacceptable in this country.
Thank you, Daryl. And I would just add, I think one of the, we've heard a lot about that we do have, the 8-to-5 employee who's working and has really stringent or limitations in terms of being able to do service or be engaged outside of sort of their working roles. And so part of our End 2025 plan does have a component dedicated to faculty, staff, and student professional development. And I think that as an institution, we'll have to really reconcile and address at a core value that if we're going to value professional development, we have to ensure that we're creating space for people to be engaged in these types of activities. And so I think that part of the answer is that we have to ensure that we are not even encouraging, that we are requiring that supervisors do apply a level of flexibility that is consistent and aligned with, this goes back to, I think it was both Rona and Daryl that talked about alignment, that is aligned with our core value that professional development is part of the experience for faculty, staff, and students at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And so our efforts and the way that we and what's expected has to reflect that. Yep, Daryl, and then our next question.
A sentence. When you go to a new computer system, there is professional development, a day is set aside, and everybody goes, because the assumption is you can't use the new system for personnel, for anything, if you're not trained on it. We do not do the same thing for professional development for DEI work, and we need to.
Well said. Do we have another question, Jerry?
Yes. There was the question of how do we get most of the department, including senior staff and administrators, on board with diversity and inclusion initiatives?
So I'm going to direct it to Dr. Albert, who, in addition to being a part of the NCAA, served in these roles at 2 different types of institutions, 2 different types of land grants. And so, Dr. Albert.
Yeah, so I think that's a very powerful question, because we get nowhere alone. And when we did our prep work with Dr. Barker, we definitely talked about the fact that he could not be the diversity star as the first person to take on this role, but it had to be all of the senior leaders across the campus saying they're gonna plant the flag related to inclusive excellence. And I think that it's a few things, right? So Daryl talked about this earlier on in her comments. We can't, if this is not framed as an imperative, it won't work. So the chancellor's framing remarks early on with the state of diversity. When I was at the University of Minnesota, the motto was diversity and equity is everybody's everyday work. And to be able to do this work well, we've got to get into the unit. So both at LSU and at the University of Minnesota, Rona talked about these diversity impact professionals. The deans are their own chief diversity officers for their colleges, right? And so this work has to be tailor-made for each of the colleges where they are understanding their own data, they're situating themselves within their own field and trying to race ahead with the ways in which they do good representational diversity work, the work of cultural inclusion for their college, and then the curricular work that is necessary so that they are competing, for, the promise of, the top engineering school in the country. But before then, the deans need to know that they have to do their own work around cultural intelligence. So it's not just about the wins and losses around the victories of assessment and outcomes. It's also the leader has to demonstrate from the grass tops, right, that they're doing their own cultural intelligence work around self-awareness and self-assessment, how they have attitudes and beliefs about othering, and then their knowledge creation and knowledge growth about the ways in which they're going to situate DE&I work in their own strat plans. It's everybody's everyday work, but the dean should be their own chief diversity officers.
And my dream is that every provost and chancellor hold everybody reporting to them, where are you on this? What do you need to learn? And I'm going to hold you accountable, not optional. It can't be optional. And there can't be myths and excuses for why, because we have the myths. There aren't, for faculty diversity, there aren't any, they won't want to come here, we can't afford them, and they won't stay. And now in a budget crisis that every institution is in, those myths can be fuel for why we're making no progress on various elements. So the accountability part of this has to be in the senior leadership, and it has to start from the top. Otherwise, it's like the myth of Sisyphus and pushing the rock up the hill, and it'll just come back down on you.
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah, Rona, go ahead.
I was just going to add, totally agree with Catrice and Daryl about embedding it, requiring it, and also in tandem with that, and I'm even thinking of the academic departments and the non-academic departments, you have individuals there that have the social capital and the influence. They're the ones that have been there 30 years. They lead by example. They lead by the water cooler, where they're like, you know what we should do, and this is really important work, and they're respected. Those individuals are advocates of this, and they can really do a lot of work. And so I'm a senior faculty member myself, and so oftentimes I'll spend time with individuals who are kind of the naysayers and say one-on-one. So a lot of times those micro moments are powerful, where it's like, what's going on? And that kind of sphere of influence is also important in tandem with the infrastructure. So.
Absolutely, really, really important points, and I'm so glad that at UNL we have a number of some of our deans serve on our Council on Inclusive Excellence and Diversity. So Dean Jones, Dean O'Connor are the actual members for their college on the council, and have certainly been engaged. And also the Chancellor has really empowered our Journey co-leaders, so our scholars and those that have expertise who are working with us on anti-racism will be meeting with all the members of the executive leadership team to again have some of these conversations. I think we're on our way, sort of again shifting this mantra from that it's one person, one office's job to it is everyone's work, which is sort of the resounding theme that we've heard from our panel. Jerry, do we have another question for the panel?
Yes, we do. How often do you step back from your work and look from a student's perspective, genuinely, not just thinking about how your work appears to students and affects them, but actually asking students what they think about what you've done and do currently?
Well, am I on?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll start off by saying, I think that it's so important to have reciprocal mentoring, right? So I often tell people that I'm Gen X, but I was raised by boomers. So I think like a boomer, I act like a boomer, I sound like a boomer, but it's so powerful to have reciprocal mentoring from millennials and Zs who keep your feet to the fire and keep you accountable and challenge you in ways that, you're dumbfounded, like, why didn't I think of this? Where's my head? And so I think that it's so important for all of us to have that level of reciprocal mentoring to be able to step back, because when you have passion and purpose for this kind of work, you just go at it so hard, right? You're dug deep in, you're just at the grindstone every day, just grinding away, trying to make movement for DE&I work and belonging work. And so sometimes you get sort of in a vacuum and in your own head. And so it's such a powerful question, because if there's nothing else that I can, impart to our participants, is to really have that level of reciprocal mentoring where you are both vulnerable and courageous enough to ask the young people around you how you're doing, what's going well, what do you need to tweak, and where you are just totally messing up. And so, and young people, millennials and Zs don't have a problem telling you straight. And so the reciprocal mentees that I have around me, they're on speed dial and on text message, and they keep me grounded related to my social media, especially when I'm not doing it enough. And they also know how to say, Catrice, I think that you're doing really well in this, in this particular area, but it's fallen flat with us in this other area, right? So, and they are very firm but fair at saying, here's where you need to race ahead and think through and get some more young people around you to help you. So I think that reciprocal mentoring is so necessary, important, and vital.
Can I add one thing too? I love that notion, Catrice, of reciprocal mentoring. I love that. Thank you for the question. I think it's incredibly important. I feel pretty honored to say that I'm still embedded among students. So I'm still in the classroom, and I actually teach the courses, intercultural communication courses, Daryl, that are required. That student, I'm always like, I know you would choose this class anyways. I know you would, even if it wasn't required. So I have students from all different majors and fields and backgrounds. And keep in mind, I'm a 23-year professor at San Jose State, and we're largely commuter. And most of my students are historically underrepresented. They pay for college themselves. They go in and out. Sometimes I see them over a period of 8 to 9 years. And they do keep it real. They absolutely keep it real. And I ask them questions all the time. I have about 100 students right now. And they always give me the student point of view on DEI and identity. A lot of students would rather talk about identity, maybe less so about race. And so those types of things. So appreciate the question.
And I think that question, I'm thinking about the audience and the students in the audience or the faculty in the audience. Do you feel empowered now to speak? And one of the concerns I have as you go up the ladder, maybe less empowerment. So I see on campuses, for example, assistant professors who have often on many campuses, more diversity than the senior professors. Are you empowered, or do you think that'll sacrifice your tenure? And we squash the very perspectives we need. And I think about this, I want to keep emphasizing it. My students were largely PhD students, older students, first generation students, persons of color. So I learned all the time of things I wasn't thinking about. But the issue is, what about your graduate students? Are they being mindful and obedient because they think they need to in order to get their degree? Or are they being empowered to speak in the classroom, in their research, reading the research and saying, why are they asking the question that way? It should be asked this way. Or are they being told, no, don't do that, it's not big enough or whatever. So I think the issue of empowerment and finding voice goes right from the very first time a student arrives all the way through the system. And we need to make sure that people feel empowered. Otherwise, the information will just have to continue dealing with explosions. I'll give you just a very personal Southern California example. Osco Drugs was around the corner from me. I don't know if you've got Osco Drugs in Nebraska, you do in Iowa. Now, it was around the corner from my house. All the labels, the millions of dollars in marketing. Months later, Osco was gone and Save-On was in, and now CVS. And the reason, if you speak any degree of Spanish, Osco means disgusting and vomit in some form of Spanish. And I kept thinking about the staff people who cleaned the building, who saw the drafts of the marketing, and who sat there and went, they're really going to call this Osco Drugs in Southern California? So Empowerment, and that can be the person who's in the dining hall. Do people feel empowered to have an opinion, to express a concern, and find its way, and this is the alignment question that Rona raised, find its way to someone who can say, we don't need an explosion, let's do something about it.
Yeah, these are really important points. And I think, thinking about this empowerment, and I think how do we create an environment that and create a level of access so that students feel like they can talk with someone about the issues that they are experiencing and be part of the conversation. And it's something that you just have to keep working on, right? So you may try something and it doesn't work, right? When I first started doing office hours at Nebraska, no one was attending. But in that moment, I said, I'm going to continue doing this because this is important. And eventually, I will demonstrate that I can be trusted in terms of being a space, being open. And so sometimes I think we can do efforts that try and get at to be able to hear student voices and then easily get distracted if we don't see the results. And so we have to keep sort of working at it so that we're also building trust, I think, too, with students so that they are empowered to be able to do that. And I think creating these spaces, how you create access again is really important. I think also ensuring that there are opportunities to be on students' terms, right? So I'm very big about, okay, if you're already having a meeting, let me know and I'll come to your meeting, right? As opposed to finding time for you to come to me, I think is really important. And then certainly being able to listen is so key, and to this ideal about reciprocating mentoring, as Catrice mentioned, I think is just really, really important. I think we have time for one or two more questions, Jerry.
The next question is, what is the structure for effective accountability for leadership commitment in this area?
That's great. So earlier there was a question about holding leaders accountable. Now the question is, what does that look like? So we are holding leaders accountable. What could that look like? Yes, Daryl.
Well, one of the things we've learned in studying organizational change in this topic around the country, and we often say that diversity work is not just about numbers, but it tells an awful lot to start with numbers and at the macro level. I've often talked to senior leaders or boards, and the report on DEI is a list of programs and projects. And in this particular moment in time, proliferation of programs and projects is not the answer of we're making progress. That just means we're doing lots of stuff. And for me, the question is, where are the markers of change? And some of those are things like Rona's work in climate assessments, the most squishiest part of this dilemma. But who's there? Access, not only for students, but faculty and staff, in leadership roles, success. Disaggregated graduation rates, time to degree at the graduate level and undergraduate level is a very important marker. Every campus, we know now what you can do to interrupt the achievement gap. We have campuses that have interrupted it. You still have some of that. So marking progress, and I don't frankly believe in just all the benchmarking to Big Ten, because if they're all doing badly, why do you want to be the best of the bad? For me, the issue is, are we making progress? So 10 years ago, what was the demographics of your faculty? Are people being promoted? Do you have a retention issue? For student success, not just at the undergraduate level, please, you should be looking at completion of your PhDs. If we are short on African-American faculty, you should be producing them. And that means identifying talent and nurturing them to success. And we're not doing a very good job on it. So I think the accountability is very simple, basic stuff. It goes from mission, just like budget. No senior leader would say, well, I don't care about the budget, or we're doing lovely things with the budget. They know exactly whether they balance the budget, where research money is coming from, advancement. I want people to know exactly how many African-American faculty they have 10 years ago and now. And I can tell you about yours and say we're not making progress.
Thank you, Daryl. I think we have time for maybe one more question, Jerry.
The next question is, how does providing multicultural centers to students of color advance inclusiveness? It would seem more beneficial for everyone to be together and learn from each other.
Can I start this? Can I start
Absolutely.
this one? I actually get asked this quite a bit because I look at identity spaces and cultural centers when I map. It's an excellent question. I think the way I would approach it is, I think sometimes when we say the word inclusion, we think that exists in a vacuum. So for me, I'm very clear that a place of learning, like a university, for example, and a public university, exists already on a societal plane that is already unequal, that there have been a hierarchy of differences, right? And so the university has an opportunity to intervene into that plane, right? However, as we know historically, most institutions have actually reproduced the same hierarchy of differences historically over time through segregation, through tuition hikes, through a number of things, non-affirming practices. So identity spaces and cultural centers weren't meant to exclude. They were meant to really speak to groups that have already been historically excluded from groups. And so I think for me, thinking about it that way, about safe spaces, and also having institutions engage in bold interventions to chip away at that already unequal societal plane, I think for me is the biggest thing. Because everyone's like, well, we should just open everything up. Yes, if historically from the test of time, we're already on the same plane. But we weren't, and we know this. So I'm not saying that people aren't welcome. If you actually go into most identity spaces and cultural centers at any of these institutions, they're like, you are welcome. But here is the mission of our group and our space. And these are our commitments. And if you want to help with that, that's important too. And affinity groups as well. So I kind of want us to complicate how we think of identity spaces and cultural centers. They're not exclusionary, but they are identity specific to match the unequal society in which we live. Maybe I'm not making myself as clear, but that's kind of my first stab at it.
No, that's really helpful. And I too want to hear from Catrice as well. I know during our time at LSU, there were the construction of the centers, a women's center, African American Cultural Center. There was also a multicultural center. There was a proposal to put all the centers together, and students clearly articulated their discontent with that idea. And so it was really important for them to have these identity spaces. And so maybe Catrice, and then we'll finish out with Daryl, and then finish out today's panel.
Yeah, and Rona, I think that you situated it and framed this wonderfully. And I think that I love the phraseology. I want us to complicate this, right? Because when you're thoughtful and you think about identity development, right? And you think about Beverly Tatum's, why are all the Black kids sitting at the cafeteria table together? It is to be able to create these safe spaces, then to be able to go out, come into the space, get the social and the emotional buildup, right? The social and emotional capital needed to go to some of these other spaces on the campus where you may be the only one. And then if for example, some conversation around race happens, the entire class turns to you, and then you're supposed to speak on behalf of your entire ethnic group. That's exhausting, right? And so, from all of the scholars that talk about racial battle fatigue in higher education, these ethnically cohesive centers allow that identity development to, number one, grow and be encapsulated, but then also the support. So if our universities had been founded on an equal plane, sure, inclusive excellence would already be here and we wouldn't be having this, amazing discussion. But all of the scholars related to identity development suggests you need these spaces in order to build up that emotional and mental and physical capital that you need in order to succeed in spaces where you are othered.
And I think the issue of the complexity of identity is really important. If I had two learning outcomes for everybody in our institution, it would be the complexity of identity and the embedded structural inequities that are invisible, that we don't see. And one of the things we know for healthy communities is not one Nebraska or we're all blue. It's the multiplicity of all of our identities. And what these spaces do actually is create an opportunity for the diversity within those communities. There are huge diversities within a African-American cultural center or a Latinx cultural center, national, religious, all kinds of LGBTQ issues. Those spaces create an opportunity also to deal with the complexity of diversity within those communities, but allowing that shared identity to be something that is shared. We build healthy communities because we share something in common and then we bring our diversity to it. And so it's not about we're all one and let's just not pay attention to all this. We all have multiple identities. And what we're trying to do in these multicultural centers and different centers is to enhance those identities that have been particularly invisible in most of our institutions.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Smith. Dr. Barker had to step away for a moment, but I do want to use this as an opportunity because there was a great question in the Q&A. I know we said we're going to wrap this part up, but I wanted to pose this because I thought it would be a wonderful way kind of to close this out, especially as we have you all that could possibly give us some words of encouragement. So there was a question that said, do you have words of encouragement for leadership on how they can do DEI work so that their hearts are open rather than offended? It's a process, and we can do this to help our community. To quote Ibram Kendi, racism is like fighting an addiction. Use persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination. You all want to use some words of encouragement? I think we have a lot of great leaders here, ways that their hearts can be opened rather than defended.
Well, I guess I can start. Dr. Smith made reference to Xavier University of Louisiana, and that's my alma mater. And I'm so proud that she used Xavier as an example. And St. Catherine Drexel was Xavier's founder, and white Philadelphia heiress who gave her fortune to open schools all across the Southwest region for African Americans and indigenous populations. And my quote that I just love, where I'm able to keep the spirit and to keep going. She says, we have to open wide our hearts, press forward and fear nothing. Open wide our hearts, press forward and fear nothing. So if nothing else, this state of diversity, you have to keep going, but it has to be done with a wide open heart. And you have to have courage and vulnerability to press forward and fear nothing, like St. Catherine Drexel.
And I would just say that, if I take out my activist scholarly hat on change and put on a president's hat or a chancellor's hat, in fact, Marco did this at the beginning, we have to mark progress. And one of the things that I would say to the activists in a community is, if I have to mark progress, just psychologically, we have to, that's what we do. And I'm an activist and I put my activist hat and I'm showing all the places where we haven't made progress, we'll do this. So one of the things that I think is so important for people who are active and care about this, and leaders who want to say, well, but we've made progress over there, is to begin to say, yes, we've made progress here, but we haven't made progress here. Let's work together for the change. And often I fear right now, and particularly right now, we're doing this. And it's much more fun to open a new building.
How can I top these two amazing contributors and what they say? I would affirm Dr. Albert and Dr. Smith's comments about working together, opening your heart. What an amazing quote. And doing the work. I mean, I think that people think, this is going to die down in a couple of months and we're just not going to have to worry about it. And I was like, wow, I've never thought about it that way. For me, DEI is life. There's a sense of permanence for me that I've never, ever not known. And maybe it was the way in which I was raised. But I think to do the work, to be courageous in doing the work, to keep talking with one another, posing questions, all those things, I think that is really, really important, to add to the other comments as well.
Thank you. So thank you all so very much. I'm going to be like Dr. Barker with my little buckets here because I've made so many notes while I've been listening to all three of you because I'm leaving so inspired. I have to say that because this work is during this period right now. I always say this to individuals on campus, but also in my personal life. I think we're in a moment where there were so many people who have come before us who've done such great work, who did not have the luxury, of course, of having so many support systems or just even looking around in ways in which we can see right now through technology what's happening. And I'd be remiss if I wouldn't mention some of those events that are kind of really clouding our own minds when we think about DE&I. So I think this is so timely, your conversations. As I'm listening to Dr. Albert, open wide our hearts, fear nothing, and press forward. Dr. Smith, which I have to keep saying, the importance of measuring the data and assessment is so key. That's just going to measure our progress. And then, of course, we're leaving with doing the work. DEI is life. And you now have a sense of permanency with this because you're committed to this work. And I think if we can leave with that, I think our campus, we're all better for that. So I just want to thank you all so very much for your time, for your expertise. I have to say that when Dr. Barker was kind of unfolding what State of Diversity would look like this year, I was very excited for a number of reasons. I was selfishly excited because I thought to myself, oh, I get to meet my boss's former boss. That was one of the reasons. And then I got to think to myself, the person who helped to craft where we are right now for this campus, all the mapping that you've done during my interview process, I read so many reports that you and your brother have done. So I was excited about that. And of course, Dr. Smith may not remember, but I was part of the Institute for SPPI in 2019. And I have continuously followed your work. So I have to say, thank you all so very much. I want to close us out now and then encourage everyone. One, of course, if you want to connect with us, our office, this is how you do so. We also have a very short survey that we're going to send out a little bit later today, but I'm also going to put this in the chat really quickly because we want to make sure, we want to hear your feedback. So for all those that attended, there's a short survey that we're asking for you to take. I want to join you all. I'm going to join everyone and say thank you all so much for our wonderful panel. I think we've all left not only inspired, but absolutely motivated for the next steps. We have a long road ahead of us, not just for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, but for the state of Nebraska and of course, for this nation as a whole. But I think with these words and with your guided expertise, I think we're on the right path forward. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. We truly appreciate it.